Hello IELTS students, I am your IELTS tutor Jack, and in today's episode of the IELTS Plus podcast, we have an easy one. We're going to talk all about birthdays. So yes, a bit of a lighter one today, birthdays, certainly lighter than last week's topic, which was AI. This week, if we got the birthday topic in IELTS exam, I think we'd be pretty happy. I'm looking at these questions here on my handout, and yeah, they're not too bad. There's some lovely vocabulary. I particularly like reminisce. That's one of today's words I'll try to use. Reminisce means to look back fondly at a memory. So it's a nice word, isn't it? Good for birthdays. We reminisce about our childhood, reminisce about some of our better birthdays. So that would be nice. I'll try to use that. And of course, right now, I'm looking down on my desk at the IELTS Plus Total Speaking textbook, which I'm showing the camera now. And that will be available on www.britplus.net. And that is the textbook for this whole series, Season 1 and Season 2, giving you all of the language and all of the structures you'll hear me use in this podcast. So one thing I'd like to do, and I think this can be every episode now, because I really want to get some engagement with the audience. I want to hear how your IELTS is going. How are your answers? Are they developing? And I want to give you a student challenge, which is basically a question one, a part one question from the IELTS speaking exam of my choice. I will give it to you, and I want you to leave your answers in the comments if you're on YouTube, and I will check. So, today's student challenge is as follows. What did you do on your last birthday? What did you do on your last birthday? A very typical part one question. It's simple. So, I want to hear a direct answer. What did you do? And give me one or two details. That's what I'd like, because that's what I do. You'll hear me give my answer today. And yeah, as I said, this is so that I can see how you are answering these questions. And I will check every single one. I'll look through the comments and make sure I give you some feedback and tell you how you're doing. I'd love to see your answers. So let's get into today's topic. And this is my first question. What did you do on your last birthday? On my last birthday, I simply had a nice meal with my family. My last birthday wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a milestone birthday or anything like that. I think I was 37. I sometimes lose track. I was 37 on my last birthday, so we just had a nice meal together, and that was great. Well, I didn't expect to reveal my age today, but there you go. It's out in the world. So the next question is, do you enjoy celebrating other people's birthdays? Yeah, sure. I like celebrating other people's birthdays. I certainly, for the people I love, I really enjoy putting together a birthday party. So for example, for my wife, I'll perhaps cook her a meal. For my daughter, well, it's normally a lot more complicated. She wants some kind of party. So yeah, I really enjoy celebrating people's birthdays and seeing how happy they are at the celebration. Good, okay. Well, just to mention, I've mentioned it a few times, but you'll notice that I used the word milestone then. I'm looking down at the side here, by the way, because this is my materials where I can see the vocabulary for today's topic. And I will, if you're watching the video, I will give you all the subtitles and I will highlight the key words, the words from my handout. So please, use that resource. I think that's a good way of checking what I'm using. And let's go on to part two. So part two is to describe a memorable birthday celebration you had. Pretty simple. Past focused. I'm just putting 2 minutes on the clock. So there you go. That's done. Describe a memorable birthday celebration you had. My time starts now. I'd like to tell you about a birthday I had when I was young at Laser Quest. perhaps I was around 10 years old. To be honest, I can't remember the exact age, but one of my favorite things to do was to go to Laser Quest. Laser Quest is somewhere where you put this pack on that, and then you shoot each other with lasers, and this pack detects when you're hit with a laser. And the whole thing is you go to this kind of this world where you're shooting each other and you're hiding behind things, and you have a war against each other. As a 10-year-old, that is incredibly exciting. So that was a really memorable birthday. And then afterwards, we went to a restaurant and had a meal together. So let me tell you a little more about this birthday. So as I said, we started in Laser Quest. We had a real memorable game there. And then we moved to this restaurant, which was one of my favorite kind of family restaurants. And we had a real feast there. And I can't remember exactly, but it was a very typical family restaurant with different meats. And I think it was probably a buffet. So yeah, we had a real feast there. And as was tradition at the time, we finished up and each person who attended the birthday got a party bag with a piece of cake and maybe a lollipop and a toy and things like that. So for me personally, it was a particularly memorable birthday because Laser Quest was so much fun. And I think I did quite well on that day. And we just all had a wonderful time. There was perhaps 10 people. In the future, of course, I don't want to go back there, but... okay. Well, I'll finish my sentence, but I hope I can give the same experience to my daughter if she wishes. That's what I wanted to say, but my time was up. So, yeah, I think that was an okay answer. I certainly went through my structure reasonably well, and I used a few of these words in today's materials. So, let's move on to part 3. Why do you think people celebrate birthdays? I think that people like to recognize their age, perhaps. Certainly you do when you're young. That's an important thing. I think as you get older, perhaps we still like to recognize milestone birthdays, such as when you're 21 or 30, or perhaps each decade, 40, 50. And I suppose it's an excuse to celebrate. We don't have that many reasons to celebrate throughout the year. Of course, it depends on your religion or culture, but a birthday is a nice excuse to get together with your friends and have a nice time. Do you think the way people celebrate birthdays reflects their culture? Yeah, I guess it does. Thinking about where I live now, which is South Korea, this culture is it's a collectivist culture, which means that they like to do things in groups. So if you look at a typical Korean birthday, I think probably the attendance is quite high. There's quite a lot of people. And I think that reflects the culture here. Now, I'm not saying in England we don't have many people attending, but certainly as we get older, the number of people attending gets much less. Apart from that, of course, you have the influence of the culture's food. And in England, of course, well, it depends on the person, but you'll have perhaps Indian or Chinese or steak or something in England because that's the popular food in England. Whereas in Korea, very often you would have Korean food, or perhaps you'd go to one of the family restaurants here. So I think there's a lot of influences from the culture that influences different aspects of a birthday party. Okay, I didn't actually think that was a great answer. I wasn't focused enough. I think I was thinking too broadly. I think as much as possible, if you can focus in on one aspect and go deep and give a nice example, that would make a better answer. But it was okay. I answered for around a minute, which is what we want. Final question. Do you think it's important to celebrate milestone birthdays like turning 18 or 50? I don't know if it's important. I think it's down to the individual. But for me personally, yes, I like to celebrate milestone birthdays. I think that some of these milestone birthdays can be very important, such as 18, where you become an adult. And for a lot of people, they really want to recognize that. Perhaps they want to make it a really memorable experience so that later, they can reminisce on this nice event that they had when they were 18, or perhaps 21 is a milestone birthday in England. Apart from that, again, as I said before, milestone birthdays can be a good excuse to get people together, your family, your friends, and enjoy yourself and recognize this significant day in your life. Good. Okay, well, I think that was a reasonable topic as we expected. Not too hard, certainly easier than AI. And I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, if you're on a podcast platform, please leave a review. Give me a 5-star if you can. That helps spread the podcast. And if you're on YouTube, leave a like, comment, and don't forget, we have our student challenge now. So leave your answer below and I will check. So have a lovely week this week, and I'll be back next week to talk about celebrities. So we're on to the letter C now in our syllabus, and we're dealing with celebrities. So as I said, have a nice week, study very hard, and I'll see you next Monday to talk about celebrities. Bye-bye.